What's going on, everyone? Welcome into the first Trade Talk Tuesday of the 2022 off-season. Now, I posted a community tab prompt asking you guys for trade ideas or trade-related questions that were Blazer-related. I know I got some non-Blazer-related, but Blazer-related trade topics or suggestions or questions is what I was looking for with that community tab prompt. I even tweeted out about it, and I didn't get many responses. I was a little bit surprised about that. Normally, you guys are pretty good with giving me stuff to talk about, so it'll be a little simpler of a video today, which is completely fine because I don't have a lot of time at the moment anyway. I've been dropping draft profiles. Hopefully you've been enjoying them. Definitely go check those out. I will have another one coming up in a couple days. I will have a standalone video tomorrow. You're just gonna have to wait and see what I'm going to talk about, but it's something relevant. It's not Joe Cronin being the normal GM. We all knew that was going to happen. I don't really have anything to say on that, so it's not a Joe Cronin video. I will have a standalone video tomorrow though, and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button, it helps me out, and let's jump into some of the trade content that you guys gave me. The first one is from Near012, who's been a channel member for over a year, so I appreciate you, Near012. Thank you for being a channel member. He says, Portland gets Jonathan Isaac for Keon Johnson and Milwaukee's 2025 pick that's top 8 protected and a 2024 second round pick. Yes, Isaac's injured, but if you can get a player of his potential for a first round pick, you do it. Orlando does it for the assets and the cap flexibility from getting off of Jonathan's contract. So let's plug this into the Fanspo trade machine. Magic do save $15 million in this trade that they would then have in cap space. I'm not sure if they're going to be valuing that as much of an asset though. This does of course work. The Portland Trailblazers $20.8 million TPE absorbs Jonathan Isaac, and then the Magic get back some future rebuilding assets with the future Milwaukee first and Keon Johnson. I just don't think Keon Johnson and this Milwaukee 2025 first have enough value for a team like Orlando. I could easily see a team more like Orlando not caring about a Milwaukee first 3 years from now, which could be very, very late in the draft, and then Keon Johnson, who they have a lot of guards already, and I know Fanspo lists Keon Johnson at 6'5". He's actually 6'3". He doesn't have the size to play the 3, so I don't really know why Orlando would value him a whole lot, so I could easily see Orlando not caring about either of these assets, and therefore I don't think this is enough to make a trade for Jonathan Isaac. And then given how injury prone he is, there's some other reasons why some people might not want him as well that I'm not going to get into. I kind of balk at giving up too much for Jonathan Isaac, and I think you'd have to give up noticeably more than this sort of package. Austin asks, what is a realistic return for Keon and the Bucks 2025 first round pick? My favorite sort of return at this point would be trading Keon and that Bucks first to Washington and getting back Rui Hachimura. Washington has a lot of forwards. They brought in Porzingis. They got Avdia. Rui didn't play a whole lot last year. I could maybe see him being gettable. Washington needs some guard help. Rui would be great to have off the bench as the backup power forward for us. He shot the ball really well last year and still has a lot of potential, so if you could swing a trade like that for him, I would do that in a heartbeat. However, I don't think that's enough to get Rui, and I don't think he's easily available or easily gettable, so a realistic return might be a PJ Washington type of player or a player of that caliber. Obviously, the problem is with Keon Johnson, and this is why I wish we got a future first round pick back in that Rocco Norm trade, is some teams are going to value him and some teams probably aren't. Like I said, with Orlando, they have a lot of young guards. They're probably not going to care for a Keon Johnson, which just adds to that logjam that they have in the backcourt. A team like Washington might want him. A team like Charlotte, it's TBD. They have Book Knight, they have Rozier, they have LaMelo Ball. They do have some depth at that position, and Book Knight barely played last year, and he was a lottery pick that they took ahead of a Keon Johnson. So that's the problem with the people that say that Keon Johnson has a first round value, is he only has a first round value to some teams. If you're trading a future first round pick, that's a first round value to every team because they can use that first round pick to draft whoever they want. But if it's a guy that you took with a first round pick or traded for that was taken with a first round pick in the past year or two, that doesn't mean he has a first round value. His value could have declined. Maybe he didn't look too good in his first year or two. And then B, he has to make sense for that team because they can't just select who they want. They are already getting a player. So that's why I balk at the notion that Keon Johnson is worth a first round pick. He's not as easily tradable. So it's hard to come up with certain packages involving Keon Johnson because he's the most valuable asset in this sort of trade. I think he has a little bit more value than the Bucks first, but if he doesn't have more value to a team than the Bucks first, then this package isn't valuable at all. So a lot of the value lies in Keon Johnson, and it's just hard to determine what teams would value him because there's definitely some that won't. So that's going to be something that Joe Cronin needs to do this offseason, is figure out what teams are interested in Keon Johnson. Next up, we got Rahi, who says, if we fall to 8, do you think something like 8 and 36 for 13-15 and PJ Washington / Kai Jones off the Hornets is a realistic trade down scenario? I think it's a realistic trade down scenario if you take out PJ Washington / Kai Jones. I don't think you can get one of those guys as well as 13 and 15 for 8 and a second round pick. I just think that's too much value on Charlotte's end. I think you could potentially trade 8 and 36 for 13 and PJ Washington, maybe 15 and PJ Washington, but I don't think you're getting both those picks and a young player from Charlotte. If the Blazers do fall to 8, I see them trying to trade down, and if they traded 8 and 36 for 13 and 15, I would highly expect one of those picks to be going to Detroit for Jeremy Grant, and then the Blazers would select a prospect with the other one. Now, that could end up looking like a good move if whoever they take ends up panning out and maybe looks better than the player taken at the spot that the Blazers traded out of, but that's the scenario that I see coming up this offseason. I wouldn't be too thrilled with that. But I expect the Blazers to trade down if they don't move up. Shout out to Tom Saransky. He says, really contingent on lottery, but the Hornets get Christian Wood, Nwaba, Lozada, and the 17th pick from Houston. Houston gets Bledsoe, Kai Jones, the 6th pick from Portland, and the 59th pick from Portland via Memphis. And then Portland gets Mason Plumlee, Kelly Oubre, and the 13th and 15th picks from Charlotte. So a lot of Charlotte conversations. Let's plug this into the trade machine. I just took out the Blazers' 59th pick and Lozada just because it cluttered this up. And also had the Blazers getting the 17th pick instead of getting the 15th pick from Charlotte and them getting the 17th pick. The value's all pretty much the same here. It's just a little bit easier to take a look at. First thing that jumps out to me is I think that the Houston Rockets are getting too much value getting Kai Jones and the 6th or 7th overall pick, whatever Portland's pick might be, for Christian Wood. I think is too much, even with them giving up the 17th pick. I think they would give up the 17th pick for Kai Jones. I certainly would if I were them. So you're talking about a mid-lottery pick for Christian Wood, who's on an expiring contract. I just don't agree with that valuation for Christian Wood. I think Charlotte would definitely consider this. They need a center, and obviously Christian Wood isn't necessarily the best defensive player. Offensively, he's very solid and will be a good fit there. Charlotte actually had Christian Wood earlier in his career. So in this trade, they give up 13 and Kai Jones and Plumlee and Oubre to get Christian Wood. I think that might be a little bit steep for them. And then for the Blazers, you trade the 6th pick. Now, I'd be more willing to do this trade if it was 7th or 8th, but you get off of Eric Bledsoe and you get back 2 useful players in Kelly Oubre Jr. and Mason Plumlee. I would definitely have to consider this, especially since, like, if you end up with a 7th pick or whatever, trading down for 13 and 17, or as was stated in the question, 13 and 15, is already legitimate enough to consider it. So then when you consider you're swapping out Eric Bledsoe for Oubre and Mason Plumlee, I actually think the Blazers kind of fleece a little bit here, depending on where their own pick is. If it's 6, then I think it's okay. If it falls down to 7 or 8, then I think it's a situation where the Blazers might fleece. So maybe the Hornets would overpay in a trade like this, and this might make some sense, but I think the Hornets are kind of getting fleeced here, and Houston and the Blazers both have solid value plays, especially Houston. I think they are absolutely fleecing. And last but not least, we got Zachary Brem, who says, assuming the money lines up, and I know this trade is unrealistic, but would you trade Ant for Siakam straight up? You definitely have to consider that, especially if the Blazers end up at 4 and take a Jaden Ivey, then obviously you gotta fix that guard situation. You got 4 guards and only enough minutes to play 3 of them, unless you go small, which we're trying to obviously move away from, so I don't really want to play Josh Hart at the small forward position. So you definitely have to consider this. I just don't think Toronto would. I think they end up trying to build around Siakam, Barnes, and OG Anunoby, and that's their 3 through 5 men, and I don't really agree with it long term. I don't think they are ever going to contend with that being the core group with Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr., of course, in the starting lineup. I just don't think that's a good enough lineup. I think they need to shake it up. I think they need a legitimate big man, but I think that's what Masai Ujiri is going to do with Toronto. So I've pitched OG Anunoby and trades that I think are good value for him, and then I have a bunch of people saying, oh, I don't think they're going to trade him. I don't think they're going to trade him either, to be quite honest with you. But if I'm talking about, you know, the ideal offseason for us, it would involve a Siakam or an OG Anunoby, and I would try and figure out ways where we could give Toronto enough value to get them. I think Ant is pretty solid value here for Siakam. You're just betting more on the unknown, and you're hoping that Ant can become a Siakam level player at the guard spot, whereas Siakam's already proven at that level, so you know that you have a player of that caliber. Therefore, I think you'd maybe have to give up a little bit more if you were Portland, and they don't have more to give up, so it would be really hard to pull off this sort of trade, and it would have to be Toronto wanting Anthony Simons and being willing to sign him, and then his salary would have to match Siakam's, or you'd have to throw in a Justice Winslow. So there's nuances and complications to this potential deal that would make it hard, and therefore I just don't think this is very realistic. I don't know if I would do it. I love Siakam as a player, and I would do it if we ended up with the 4th pick. If we end up with the top 3 pick, and then we trade maybe a Milwaukee first and Keon Johnson for Jeremy Grant, and then we bring in Jabari Smith or Paolo Banchero or Chet Holmgren, then I probably would keep Ant in that scenario. So my answer to this question depends on what we do. Anyway, that wraps up this Trade Talk Tuesday. I will have a different format for future Trade Talk Tuesdays. I'll look at trades of a specific kind, so definitely stay tuned for those coming every other week. I will have another video tomorrow, as I said, and then draft profile Thursday, and then we'll have a stream highlights video on Friday. So I hope you're enjoying the content. With that being said, I'm out of here. Until next time, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.